You know, we usually look for God in the right places, in Gothic cathedrals, in great councils, in libraries of systematic theology, and it makes sense. Church history is made of these grandiose moments. But sometimes the history of Christian spirituality happens in a place that smells of onions, grease, and dirty dishes. I was rereading an old record this week, a conversation that took place on August 3rd, 1666. The world outside was literally catching fire if we think of the Great Fire of London that would happen a month later. Europe was tense. But in Paris, in a Carmelite monastery, a man named Joseph de Beaufort went to visit a lay brother. The name of this brother was Nicholas Herman, but we know him as Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. And what fascinates me about this conversation, the first of 4 that were recorded, is not that Lawrence was an intellectual genius who solved the riddles of the Trinity. What impresses me is his brutal honesty, and the disconcerting simplicity with which he viewed life. I keep thinking, we complicate things so much, don't we? And then comes this man amidst the pots and pans and dismantles our complexity with a single sentence. Today I wanted to think out loud with you about this conversation, about how a clumsy man who broke everything he touched found the secret to living contentedly in the presence of God. Let's be honest about who Brother Lawrence was. Hagiography, those biographies of saints that seem like superheroes, usually polishes people's edges. But the record of this 1666 conversation keeps the flaws. And I love that. Lawrence tells his visitor that before being a monk, he worked as a footman, a type of servant, for a certain Monsieur Flaubert, who was the king's treasurer. And listen to how he describes himself. He was a great awkward fellow who broke everything. First conversation. I can visualize the scene. You know that big guy with heavy hands who goes to clean a porcelain vase and suddenly... crack? That was our spiritual guide. A great awkward fellow. This brings me enormous relief. Because often I feel that to have a deep spiritual life, I need the elegance of a Byzantine monk or the discipline of a German academic. But Lawrence begins his journey by admitting his natural ineptitude. He wasn't fit for the world of the court. He didn't have the necessary finesse. And here's the curious point, where his psychology reveals itself in a very human way. He says he wanted to enter the monastery not because he felt holy, but because he thought he would be punished there for his clumsiness. He thought, I will enter religious life. There I will make mistakes, I will break things, and the monks will make me suffer for it. And so, I will sacrifice my life and my pleasures to God through humiliation. It's a somewhat dark thought, I admit, but it shows his seriousness. He was willing to pay for his defects. He entered the monastery expecting discipline, severity, perhaps even the contempt of the other brothers for being so clumsy. But, and here comes the first big plot twist of this conversation. God had another plan. Lawrence says something that makes me smile every time I read it. But God disappointed him, having found nothing but satisfaction in that state. God disappointed him. What a wonderful phrase. God frustrated his plan of self-flagellation. Lawrence went looking for penance for his inability, and God gave him satisfaction. He went expecting the whip of shame, and found the embrace of grace. This makes me think about how often we, modern Christians, still look for God expecting him to confirm how bad we are, how awkward we are, and we get surprised, perhaps even uncomfortable, when he simply offers us his presence and peace. It is hard to accept that grace does not depend on our performance, not even our performance in feeling guilty. But how did this great awkward fellow reach this point? Where did this faith come from? He recounts that his conversion happened at 18. And it wasn't in a church service, it wasn't reading a specific verse. It was looking at a tree. It was winter. The tree was stripped bare, dry, looking dead, black against the gray sky. Any of us would walk past it without noticing. But young Nicholas, the future Lawrence, stopped. He looked at that dead wood and thought, "In a little while the leaves will return, then the flowers, and then the fruit." That was it, a simple biological observation. But in that moment, something clicked in his soul. He says he received a high view of the providence and power of God. That dry tree, which held within itself the promise of future life, was the sermon that changed his life. He realized that life is not what we see now, the winter, the scarcity, the apparent death. Life is the power of God flowing beneath the bark, capable of renewing everything in due time. Lawrence says that this vision loosed him from the world. I keep imagining, how many times do I look at the situations in my life, my crises, my failures, or even the state of the church and the world, and see only the dry tree, see only the winter? Lawrence at 18 had the audacity to see the fruit before it existed. That is faith. And he says that this sensation of love for God, kindled on that winter day, never faded. 40 years later, chatting in that kitchen in 1666, he said that that love had not increased, because it had already started at a maximum level of intensity. Think about that for a moment. A faith born not from the fear of hell, but from admiration for God's capacity to bring life where there seems to be death. It's a much more solid foundation, don't you think? Now, let's get to the heart of the conversation. What did this man do all day? He washed dishes, he repaired sandals, he peeled potatoes. But his mind wasn't on the potatoes, nor was it curiously on complex, abstract theological meditations. He tells the visitor, Beaufort, that the secret is to establish ourselves in a sense of God's presence by continually conversing with Him. Continually conversing. It's not praying in the formal sense on one's knees with liturgy. It's chatting. It's company. Lawrence thought it was a shame that we should stop this conversation to think of trifles and fooleries. And here, I feel a prick of conscience. If Brother Lawrence lived today with our smartphones, social media, and the 24-hour news cycle, what would he say about our trifles? We fragment our attention all the time. Lawrence proposed the opposite, total integration. He said that faith should be the rule of conduct. And here he makes a very interesting criticism, which is worth reading carefully. It is a pity that we have so little faith, and that instead of taking faith as the rule of their conduct, men amuse themselves with trivial devotions which change daily. Trivial devotions. I wonder what he meant by that. I suspect he was talking about those spiritual fads. You know, when we think we need to do such and such novena, or this specific type of fast, or read the book of the moment to feel close to God, we keep jumping from method to method. For Lawrence, this was a distraction. The path was simpler, and by being simpler, perhaps harder. Just be there. Recognize that God is in the kitchen with you, that He is in traffic, that He is in the Excel spreadsheet that won't balance. He said that this was sufficient. He didn't need anything else to attain a high degree of perfection, just constant company. It is a spirituality of friendship, not of rituals. But make no mistake, this continual conversation is not a romantic alienation. It's not smiling at the ceiling while the world collapses. Lawrence speaks about resignation. And nowadays we don't like that word, right? It sounds like defeat. Oh, I resign myself. But in his vocabulary, resignation is active trust. He says we must surrender to God in both temporal and spiritual things. And here is the challenge. We must seek satisfaction in God's will, whether He leads us through suffering or consolation. He says, all things would be equal to a soul truly resigned. Can you imagine that? Reaching a point of maturity where the good day and the bad day carry the same spiritual weight, because both come from the hand of a friend? He talks about moments of dryness in prayer, those days when you pray and it feels like you're talking to the wall. For Lawrence, this wasn't a sign that God had left. It was the ideal moment to make an act of resignation. It was the time to prove that we love God, and not just the sweets that God gives. And this confidence made him incredibly robust in the face of evil in the world. The visitor, Monsieur Beaufort, must have been commenting on the news of the time, the scandals, the sins of Parisian society. And Lawrence's response is shockingly realistic. He says he is not surprised by the miseries and sins he hears about. On the contrary, he was surprised that there were not more, considering the malice of which sinners were capable. He wasn't naive. He knew the human heart is a factory of problems, but he didn't despair. He said, "I pray for them, but knowing that God can remedy the evils when it pleases him, I trouble myself no more about it." This isn't apathy. It is the peace of someone who knows who is in control. He did his part. He prayed, but refused to carry the weight of governing the world on his shoulders. That weight belongs to God, not us. At the end of that conversation, in August 1666, Brother Lawrence issued an invitation to the visitor. He said, "If you sincerely want to serve God, you may come speak to me as often as you like, but if not, you need not visit me again." He didn't have time for the curious or for spiritual gossip. He wanted to talk about what mattered. I keep thinking about the great awkward fellow going back to his pots and pans after the visit left. Maybe he broke another plate that day. Maybe the soup burned. But I am certain that, there in the midst of the smoke, he was having the most interesting conversation in the world with his best friend. This story challenges me, not to be a monk, but to transform my kitchen, my office, my car, my living room, into a sanctuary. It doesn't need candles. It doesn't need Latin. It only needs us to remember, He is here, and He likes our company, even if we are a bit clumsy. It's worth letting this idea rest a little in our hearts today.